What do you do when your deepest prayers feel unheard? In 1 Samuel chapters 1 and 2, we will meet a woman named Hannah, a woman carrying silent heartbreak in a culture that measures her worth by what she cannot have. While others misunderstand her pain, she brings it honestly before God, and everything begins to change. But this isn't just a story about personal struggle. It's about how God works behind the scenes. While Hannah is praying in obscurity, God is preparing to reshape the future of an entire nation through Hannah. And it all begins with Hannah's suffering, but also Hannah's faithful obedience and reliance on God. Sometimes God does his greatest work in the quiet, unseen places through faith that refuses to give up. So as we begin, ask yourself, how do I respond when God seems silent? And what might he be doing right now that I can't yet see? So 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 1. There was a certain man of Ramathaim Zophim, so it's just a city, of the hill country of Ephraim. So Ephraim is just one of the 12 tribes. The whole country of Israel is cut up into 12 little tribes. One section is called Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah, the son of Jeroham, son of Elihu, son of Tohu, son of Zuph, and Ephrathite. So here, this is very common. They don't have last names, but the way you identify is you go back in time for his fathers. The son of this guy, who is the son of this guy, is the son of this guy. So now you get his lineage and you understand that he's actually a Levite. So this is important because later we're going to talk about Samuel. So this man is a Levite, but he lives in Ephraim, which is a different tribe. So Levite is the 13th tribe. It's the holy tribe that doesn't actually have land, and they're dispersed amongst all 48 cities across the country. So every tribe has a couple of cities that they have to preserve to allow Levites to live there. The Levites, what do? Occasionally they have to rotate into Jerusalem to do temple work. If you are of the Aaron line, Moses' older brother Aaron, then you live in Jerusalem and you do all the priestly stuff. But if you're a Levite but not of Aaron, you're scattered amongst the 48 cities that are sprinkled across the 12 other tribes, and they give you land. And what you do there is you can do shepherding, you can do all these other stuff, but mainly you also interpret the Torah. You explain to them God's law. You might be a local judge. So they do a lot of ministering, so religious teaching, but also legal counsel and reconciliation between families and people, kind of like the local judicial system. The offerings given by all the other 12 tribes will help support their livelihoods. But they also are allowed to make weaving and cloth and shepherd. Like they can also have livestock and other ways of, it's not like they're not allowed to work in other capacities, but they often do work as a city center for teaching God's law and interpreting God's law. So managing between disputes among the locals. So this man lives in the Ephraim territory, but is a Levite. This man, Elkanah, he had 2 wives. The name of one was Hannah, and the name of the other was Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. Scholars believe since Hannah was mentioned first, Hannah was probably the first wife, and Peninnah was the second wife. It does say Peninnah had children, Hannah had no children, so the assumption is Hannah was his first choice to marry, but couldn't have kids. And so the husband was like, it's really important that I have descendants for just that cultural context. And it sounds like he's very wealthy. So he basically recruited a second wife, mainly to have descendants, to have offspring. Now here we have a problem. His favorite wife can't have kids, and so he had to bring on another woman to bear children, which was supposed to be Hannah's job, but Hannah couldn't have the kids. Verse 3, now this man used to go up year by year from his city to worship and to sacrifice to the Lord of hosts, and this is Yahweh, at Shiloh, where the 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were priests of the Lord. And so this is a common thing. You have to go every year to worship and sacrifice. And we'll talk a little bit more about this later. Verse 4, on the day when Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions to Peninnah his wife and to all her sons and daughters, so all his own sons and daughters, but born by his second wife. Verse 5, but to Hannah he gave a double portion because he loved her, though the Lord had closed her womb. And so it's clear. He clearly loves her more. And it seems like she was the first wife anyway. She was his first choice. But due to the cultural pressures and restrictions and requirements, he really felt like he needed a descendant. So married another woman so that he could have children. So basically using Peninnah for kids, but not truly maybe loving her. Makes sense that verse 6, and her rival, Hannah's rival, used to provoke her grievously. So Peninnah used to provoke Hannah grievously to irritate her because the Lord had closed Hannah's womb. Verse 7, so it went on year by year. As often as she went up to the house of the Lord, she used to provoke her. Peninnah provoked Hannah. Therefore, Hannah wept and would not eat. And we don't know how many years, but it sounds like now there's multiple sons and daughters on Peninnah's side. So this could be 10 years, could be 20 years by now. So I could see after a time, this was supposed to be for worship, but now it's torture. Verse 8, and Elkanah, her husband, said to her, why do you weep? And why do you not eat? And why is your heart sad? Am I not more to you than 10 sons? And it's funny because one of the commentator was like, he is like a typical husband. He doesn't understand. He doesn't understand her heart. He doesn't understand that, yeah, she loves him and he loves her and she's just confident in the marital relationship. But she does at some point want kids. And when she can't have those kids, it's very painful. Already nowadays, infertility is super painful for both the husband and the wife. Now imagine there's a second wife who has like an army of children and that also are openly mocking you any chance they get. Like, come on, this is painful. And it's interesting because as we know in the Old Testament, it's not just this incident. We see this happening with Sarah, Abraham and Sarah. Or then Sarah gets her handmaid Hagar, and then similar bickering within the family. And then we see this with Jacob. He likes Rachel, but then had to marry Leah due to the trickery. And then now he has Leah. Leah keeps getting more and more babies, and then Rachel has no babies, but Rachel is the favored wife. And then the bickering between the sisters is also very intense, and it's painful. It's a lot of fighting. Yes, God does not encourage having more than one wife. It does actually say in the Old Testament, keep the wife of your youth. Enjoy that same wife. But people often, with their own rationale, will get a second wife, get a third wife. And we later will see not only in this, but also in David's life. God wants it to be one man, one woman. But when there are multiple wives, there tends to be a lot of strife, a lot of familial tension, and eventually sometimes even murder, cross-murdering, even rape that happens inside. And so family should have been a blessing. But when we marry outside of God's plan and God's intention, a lot of strife and hatred and tension can come in. So once again, some people will be like, see, look, they didn't do this, they didn't do that. But it's not like God said it was okay. God allows us to have free will and have our choice. And then they chose, but you sleep in the bed you make kind of thing. So he's like, aren't I better than you than 10 sons? It's interesting that she's not like, you don't get it. But verse 9, after they had eaten and drunken, Hannah arose. Now Eli the priest was sitting on the seat beside the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. So Hannah gets up from the eating area inside the temple and she walks over to a different location into the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. So Eli the priest is sitting there. Verse 10, she was deeply distressed and prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. Verse 11, and she vowed a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your servant herself and remember me and not forget your servant, but will give to your servant a son, then, she's making a promise here, if you give me a son, then I will give this son, I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall touch his head. So this part, no razor shall touch his head, this part is a Nazarite vow. So she's promising that this child will be raised and born as a Nazarite for his life. And a Nazarite is very specific. If you look back in Numbers chapter 6, it's basically what John the Baptist was. It's what Samson was. So basically you abstain from any products of the grapevine. So any wine, because you're distancing from fleshly pleasures. And then you take no part in mourning for the dead, so even funerals. You don't even come near it because dead shows the corruption and the fruit of sin. You never cut your hair so that it's an outward visible sign to others that you are in your Nazarite vow. Now, usually people only take this vow for a short time. So people might say, I'm going to do it for a year or two. But Samuel and Samson, those were very unique people because they were doing it from birth. Samson, because God told them to do it from birth. Samuel, because the mother promised, if you will give me this child, I will offer him up and raise him in this lifestyle. And it's interesting because Levites already are supposed to be for God. Levites are the tribe that is set apart for God. And they all have to go into service. They all have to rotate into priestly duties and civil services between the age of 30 and 50. So already for 20 years, every Levite man has to give their time to God to serve in ministry for 20 years. But now she's like, I'm doing an even greater consecration than the Levites. I'm going to do his whole life. So there is her complete, utter desperation. And she's like, if you give me this child, I will give him back to you in this way. I will consecrate him and offer him up in this way. And she's not fighting with Peninnah anymore. She's not debating with her husband about his love versus children. She just goes to the Lord. And I think this is helpful for me. I want to like debate with my husband or argue, and it's like, go to the Lord first. Go to the Lord and rely on God in your anguish, as opposed to trying to fix it or argue. And here we see Lord of the Hosts starts to be used quite frequently. A couple verses ago and now here. So Lord of the host, this word host means armies, Lord of the mighty armies, heavenly host, like the sun, moon, and stars and the planets. So Lord of the heavenly host, Lord of the mighty heavenly armies, which includes Lord of the angel armies, the spiritual armies, right? So the idea is Lord, the commander of the things that can be commanded. We don't know, but perhaps she feels the attack of her enemy, which is the other wife. So perhaps she feels calling upon God as a commander, as a military fighter to defend her. Maybe that is how much she feels in her daily life, that it's just a war zone every day. Verse 12, as she continued to pray before the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Verse 13, Hannah was speaking in her heart, only her lips moved and her voice was not heard. And we do this a lot, right? We're praying and our lips are moving, but there's no audible sound. Therefore, Eli took her to be a drunken woman. Verse 14, and Eli said to her, how long will you go on being drunk? Put your wine away from you. And so the fact that his first thought is she's drunk means that by this time, the temple had become so messy that it was probably common for people to get drunk during their fellowship worship meal, their feast outside. After the offering, you often eat together with the priests who did your offering. So that's why you share some of the food to them, but then you also share together as a communion. So people are getting drunk on these worship services and worship meals and then stumbling into the temple to pray or do whatever. And then we do find out later on that it is true. The temple and religious activities has devolved into a very fleshly and ungodly way. And we'll see that the priest's sons, in fact, lead the charge. They do a lot of these bad behaviors. It's sad, but I guess he's not surprised that this woman might be drunk. His first guess is, don't be drunk here. Verse 15, but Hannah answered, no, my lord, I am a woman troubled in spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have been pouring out my soul before the Lord. Verse 16, do not regard your servant as a worthless woman, for all along I have been speaking out of my great anxiety and vexation. If I was praying and someone were to claim that I was drunk, I'd be like, dude, I'd be defensive. But she's still very respectful because this is the high priest of the land. She is very respectful, but she also doesn't just like, oh, okay, and then walk away. She stands up for herself. She clarifies, but in a very respectful manner. She does explain. And then we do see here that she's trying to express to him, I have such deep anxiety. I have such deep sadness here. Verse 17, then Eli answered, go in peace, and the God of Israel grant your petition that you have made to him. So it's interesting here because Eli has no idea what she just said, right? Because she was whispering. So he has no idea what promise, the vow, or anything. And it could be he was just trying to be nice or be priestly because he is the shepherd of the people during this time. So it could be he's just like, okay, go in peace. Okay, peace be with you. Your prayers have been heard. But, and God does this, right? He didn't mean it that it's going to come true, but it truly does come true. God has heard her and he will honor that. And verse 18, and she said, let your servant find favor in your eyes. Then the woman went away and ate, and her face was no longer sad. So we actually see that even if Eli didn't mean it, Hannah believed it because she wasn't eating before. Remember, she was crying and not eating, and her husband was like, why won't you eat? Mm-hmm. And now, after her prayer, she truly believes, and then thankfully Eli was speaking a nice word to her, but even if he didn't mean it, she believed it. And it doesn't matter if the speaker doesn't mean it because it's between her and God. She truly believed. She walked away, her complete demeanor changed. She starts eating, her face was no longer sad. And we do truly see she believed and she had faith. And we actually see later on Hebrew, New Testament, it actually says Hannah has faith. And that's why God also answered and responded to her. So she truly believed. Verse 19. They rose, so this family, Elkanah's family, they rose early in the morning and worshipped before the Lord. Then they went back to their house at Ramah. So it'd be like last day in Jerusalem, worship one more time before you go back and travel back to Ramah. And Elkanah knew Hannah, his wife, and this is where we know that means they slept together. Mm-hmm. And the Lord remembered her. Not that the Lord ever forgot her, but as in the Lord heard her prayer and also honored that prayer. And the Bible uses this, the Lord remembered, also for Sarah and Rachel. So Sarah, Abraham's wife, when her womb was closed for decades and then finally had Isaac, it was also used as Lord remembered her. So it wasn't that God forgot her, but it was as though God opened her womb. It's like, okay, now is the time. Now is God's timing. Rachel, same thing during her childbirth. For Joseph, it was the Lord remembered Rachel and then opened her womb. And then she started having kids. Verse 20, and in due time, Hannah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Samuel, for she said, I have asked for him from the Lord. So Samuel here is Shamuel. So Shema, like heard or obey, and El is God. So God has heard. God has heard what I asked and given it to me. Some people also say Shem sounds like Shal, asked, and Mu is from, and El is God. So it could also mean asked from God. Some people also say Shem sounds like name. So it could also mean in God's name or name of God, right? So the idea is the power of the name of God. This is how this child came to be, because she prayed in the Lord's name. Lord of hosts, hear my prayer. Verse 21, the man Elkanah and all his house went up to offer the Lord the yearly sacrifice and to pay his vow. Verse 22, but Hannah did not go up, for she said to her husband, as soon as the child is weaned, I will bring him, so that he may appear in the presence of the Lord and dwell there forever. And we're going to guess that makes sense, because she's like, the next time I take this child up to the temple, I need to fulfill my vow. Yeah. I need to leave him there. So if this is her first child, and she doesn't know if she's going to have any more. Spoiler alert, she does have more. But what if she doesn't, right? To think like my first kid, I don't know.
Especially after trying for so long. Oh my
Infertility,
goodness.
finally, and then, but you promised, right? And you are grateful that God finally, you know that it's a miracle, because for 20 years you're not having a baby, and then suddenly you have a baby. She names him, clearly crediting that this is only possible through God. And they didn't have IVF back then. And so weaning, they guess back then was about 2 to 3 years old. So it's very little, very, very little. So I could see for maybe 2-3 years of the annual worship, she's like, you guys go ahead. I'm going to stay home until it's time. And then that next time we go, I have to give him to God. Verse 23, Elkanah, her husband, said to her, do what seems best to you. Wait until you have weaned him. Only may the Lord establish his word. So it's good counsel. He's like, do what you see fit, but you need to make sure we're honoring and obeying God. Because she probably shared with him the vow and the prayer. So he's like, do what you seem fit, but please make sure you are honoring the Lord. So the woman remained and nursed her son until she weaned him. Verse 24, and when she had weaned him, she took him up with her, along with a 3-year-old bull, an ephah of flour, and a skin of wine, and she brought him to the house of the Lord at Shiloh. The child was young. Then they slaughtered the bull, and they brought the child to Eli. And she said, oh, my Lord, as you live, my Lord, I am the woman who was standing here in your presence, praying for the Lord. Verse 27, for this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted me my petition, my ask, that I made to him. Therefore, I have lent him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he is lent to the Lord. So here, lent, it doesn't mean I'm just letting you borrow. It means I present, I offer him up. So it's not that she's coming back on her word or trying to shortchange God. It's just a wording choice and translation. It means I present him to the Lord. And it makes sense because she hasn't gone up for several years. Yeah. So she's like, Eli, who's old now, priest Eli, I'm the one that you thought was drunk and was praying. And that prayer that I prayed that you said, peace be with you, go ahead, you'll be fine. The baby came. This is that baby. This is that baby that you were just being nice to me about, but it came out. But then this is a lot of times people buy this for the nursery. For this child I prayed for. But I think it's so much more when you actually see the context of it. Nowadays, we're like, this is the child I prayed for, but then it's my child. I'm not giving him to God. I'm not offering him up, or I'm not pointing him towards the Lord. Or if he chooses to do his life in ministry, like he chooses to not be a doctor or a lawyer and decides to go into full-time ministry, like, would the parent be okay? But here is not when she's holding the baby. She actually says this as she's dropping him off at the temple in Jerusalem. And then finally, he, and really some people will say it's they, So they worship the Lord there. So the family is there. So you actually notice throughout the first chapter, the family is constantly in worship. Hannah goes down to worship. They have a worship meal and then they eat. And even before the day they leave Jerusalem back home, they worship one more time. And then every year, even when Hannah is at home with Samuel, every year he's like, got to go back and worship God. So it does show that Elkanah is a faithful, strong believer and is faithful. Even though there's like this strife inside of his family with the two wives and stuff. And then, so Samuel is from this type of lineage. And that's another reason why he can live in the temple and be presented to do priestly duties. Because if he's not of Levite, he technically also can't go in there. So that's chapter 1.